Well, good afternoon, everyone. First and foremost, thank you for being here today. Today is a very important, consequential day. It's Paul Kane's birthday, so I want to make sure we first recognize Paul Kane. Happy birthday to Paul. Grateful to everybody for being here today. I'm here today with two of our most prominent ranking members in the House Democratic Caucus, Ranking Member Richard Neal, of course, of the prestigious Ways and Means Committee, and Ranking Member Robert Garcia of the Oversight Committee. And we're here to convey a very simple message to the American people. There's a lot going on right now, but something that I believe was lost in the news over the course of the last several weeks is the simple fact that in the history of our country, no president has profited off of public office more than Donald Trump. According to financial disclosures released just a few weeks ago, roughly, I believe, 15 days ago, the president's income in 2025 soared to over $2.2 billion. Think about that, $2.2 billion with a B, more than half of which was generated by his crypto empire that him and his family have been busy building. How do we know that Donald Trump is using the White House to increase his personal wealth? Well, because besides the fact that these brazen self-enrichment schemes are happening in broad daylight, the numbers, the empirical data tell the story. In 2024, before returning to office, Trump's profits were just under a third of what they were in his first year back in Washington, D.C. Meanwhile, the American people are struggling, from Massachusetts to California to Colorado. I have the privilege of serving. Under the Trump administration, gas prices are up, groceries are more expensive, affordable health care is out of reach for millions, not to mention the social safety net meant to support families and communities across our country that has been ripped out from under them. At the end of the day, the Congress has a constitutional obligation to hold this president and his administration accountable and to root out corruption wherever we see it. And I am grateful that we have two incredibly talented ranking members who are committed to doing precisely that. With that, I'm now going to turn it over to Ranking Member Richard Neal, the Ways and Means Committee.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Robert. So what's remarkable, I think, about what we've witnessed is that it's the disclosure statements which confirm what Joe just got done saying, and that is how far that they have gone to enrich themselves with the number of stock trades on a daily basis. I mean, I don't know when a president finds time to do any of these things, coupled with the fact that his own statement, when he said that he thought it was unusual, with some modesty for a change, when he said that he was going to be suing himself, meaning that he was the plaintiff and the defendant in a particular case. The lawsuit that came from the IRS was beyond anything I've ever witnessed before. That agency, which is supposed to be independent of the federal government for good in the federal government galaxy for obvious and good reason, because it's supposed to have a reputation that is beyond dispute. That agency controls billions of dollars in taxpayer undertakings, and the president negotiated a sweetheart deal. But the court, as recently as a couple of 3 days ago, they indicated that not only do they think it was a bad deal, but the judge decided that she would bring or recommend charges against the attorneys that were involved because of the manner of which they shaped the agreement. So think about what that so-called settlement meant. It would mean that if Congress hadn't balked at it, that billions of dollars of taxpayer resources would be redirected to the president to settle his own grievances once again. Even though Todd Blanche said that he would not proceed with the fund, the Justice Department has not put that in writing yet, which is a reminder of how broad the authority is that this president has embraced for himself. The settlement also granted extraordinary protections from tax audits and federal investigations. It defies imagination. As I pointed out some time ago in a long-standing case that we had, every president since Richard Nixon had voluntarily released their tax forms. And after a 4-year battle in the federal courts, in 4 different courts, 3 different decisions, we were able to bring about that disclosure. That's not how it's supposed to work. That should have been honored based upon the initial request at that time that the Ways and Means Committee had. But There's another important consideration here, and that is that the independence of the IRS is essential. People have to have faith in the IRS. Tax laws are supposed to apply equally, whether you're a school teacher, a small business owner, or indeed the President of the United States. The administration continues to try to bend the institutions of governance to their will for the purpose of advancing his own interest. And this latest decision from the court in Florida, where the judge really took a vigorous position, I think reinforces what I've just said. This court has spoken, and now Congress has a responsibility to continue to demand clear accountability. And if we don't put our eyes in scrutiny of these matters, it ill serves our constitutional function, and it allows this enrichment that we're witnessing to continue. The American people deserve more, so thanks to Joe Neguse for doing this.
Thank you. And I want to, of course, thank Assistant Leader Neguse for bringing us together. Now, we have said that this is the most corrupt president in American history. That is absolutely true. And we've also now disclosed, of course, the $2.2 billion that the press and the media and the public knows about, where Trump has essentially enriched himself and, of course, his family. Now, whether you're a president, member of Congress, or anyone, this is unacceptable, it's corrupt, and it's certainly illegal. Now, as Americans are struggling with gas, groceries, the cost of goods, paying the rent, Donald Trump and their family are enriching themselves, in particular with this corrupt crypto scheme. But it's important to also put that in context. The crypto scheme might be the most blatant corrupt thing that the folks and people in the community can see, but what we're also not seeing are the real estate deals being done by the sons. We're also not seeing the direct work that Jared Kushner is doing to enrich himself and his family with an investment fund that the Saudis pumped $2 billion in. We're not seeing the corruption of selling pardons, the corruption of selling pay-to-play at the White House, literally ticketed events at the People's House. And so whether it's the crypto scheme, whether it's the real estate deals, whether it's the selling of pardons, whether it's the sons enriching themselves off real estate deals after their father's doing diplomacy, all of that comes back to a White House that is centered on enriching themselves and at the same time taken away from taxpayers. And as they continue to give tax breaks to the ultra-rich and the largest corporations and enrich themselves and their family, the American public is suffering. They can't afford the groceries. The American public can't afford to pay the rent. And yet Donald Trump is getting infinitely richer. As it relates to the crypto scheme, we should also be clear that it's a clear violation of the Constitution. And it's clear that Donald Trump is going to continue to put these kind of schemes in place so he can enrich himself and his family even more. I know that our committees, whether it's Ways and Means, whether it's Judiciary, whether it's Oversight, will continue to investigate all levels of corruption, but especially this crypto scheme as well.
Again, I just want to echo the remarks of Ranking Member Garcia and Ranking Member Neal and appreciate their steadfast leadership and their ability to ultimately get to the bottom of the pervasive self-dealing that is happening at the White House. Again, you maybe ask you why we're having the press conference today. And again, it is very simple, that in a very fractured media environment and ecosystem that we all find ourselves in, it can be difficult sometimes to understand the intensity of the corruption that's happening at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. And it is important for every American watching to understand that the only person in America who's getting richer these days is Donald Trump and his billionaire sycophants that he surrounded himself with in the cabinet. We have two ranking members here who intend to get to the bottom of it, and that is precisely what we'll do in the coming weeks and months, and hopefully in the 120th Congress. With that, we'll take some questions. Max.
Thanks. One of the news of the day, things dominating is the Massey Amendment, which will come up later. This vote series, we've seen Jeffrey say he'll be a no, and Clark say she'll be a yes. I know Congressman Garcia said he'll be a yes. Congressman Neguse, as a member of leadership, what is your reflection on Jeffries and Clark diverging on this vote when so often they've talked about unity and sticking together as a caucus? And how do you intend to vote?
I would just say more broadly, we are a big tent party with a wide, diverse range of views about any number of issues, both domestic and foreign policy related, and geopolitical, of course, including this particular amendment that you referenced, which we'll, of course, be voting on in a couple hours, I guess, on the House floor. And my view is that notwithstanding policy differences we might have and where folks may land on a particular procedural amendment, we're all undergirded by our shared values. I think that was true yesterday. I think it will be true tomorrow, irrespective of this particular vote. And in terms of how I vote, you'll soon see. So, yeah. Yes, sir.
What do you make of how Republicans have done it? They've put this amendment on the floor. They advanced it out of House Rules Committee. What do you think is their goal here in forcing a vote on this in the House?
I don't think there's any question as to their goal, and I would echo the sentiments that were expressed by both Leader Jeffries and by Whip Clark with respect to the portions of their respective statements touching on the sheer political lens by which House Republicans are approaching not just this particular amendment, but any number of amendments that they've made in order in the Rules Committee. There were a wide variety of amendments that were submitted by House Democrats. As you know, I serve on the Rules Committee, and I happen to know a bit more about this than maybe other members, and I can tell you that this Republican Congress has presided over the most closed Congress, and Paul can test our institutional memory on this point, than in the modern history of the U.S. House. So there's, of course, a political reason as to why they chose to make this particular amendment in order, and that is true of other amendments that they've decided to make in order. Paul?
I will defer to others on the rules stats. I'm sure Don can figure it out. In terms of corruption,
Don agrees with me. Hey, go ahead. Yeah.
in terms of corruption, is there a worry that there are just too many different things that you are all focusing on, whether it's from Epstein to taxes to crypto and is there politically something where you try to just decide, all right, these two things so that the voters get it?
Yeah, I would say that to your larger point, Paul, I certainly don't disagree that there is so much corruption happening at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. The record is so replete with abuses and self-dealing and kickbacks and the like that it can be difficult for citizens, for voters, and for members of Congress, I think, to kind of zero in on a particular example that is far more distasteful than all the others. What I would say is that, in my view, respectfully, the connective tissue behind all of it is that Donald Trump is making money hand over fist. That at the end of the day, him and his family and his cabinet members are all making ridiculous amounts of money. In some cases, they are trying to subvert the legal system to actually procure taxpayer dollars in the case of the slush fund that obviously, thanks to Richie Neal and other efforts, we've been able to subvert for the moment. In other cases, it's, various other forms of corruption. But yes, I'll turn to Richie Neal and to Robert.
So I intend to put out an affirmative agenda if we're successful in November, for sure. Because I do think that there's an oversight obligation, but there's also some actions that have to be taken on Social Security, on Medicare. Long-term care comes to mind. So let's retrace what we did in those 4 years that I was the chairman. When you look back at the Butch-Lewis Act, when you look back at the tax side of the infrastructure bill, when you look at the tax side of the CHIPS legislation, when you look at Secure 2.0, when you go to the entire package that everybody in America, including many of you, I suspect, got a paycheck in the worst moments of the pandemic, it was a very affirmative agenda that we put out. And if it was at a different time, perhaps, then many people today who spend their time with their thumbs rather than analyzing what was done, then I think they would conclude that periods like the one that we're in, I hope, are an anomaly, but I do feel very strongly that we should have an affirmative agenda that we intend to put forward. And I think rather than doing what I call now the make-up markups, just trying to fill space to satisfy, once again, the president's agenda, I think it's very short-sighted. So I'm going to reiterate the Ways and Means Democrats in our caucuses. We talk about this repeatedly. We intend to have an affirmative agenda going forward.
I'll just add that I think caucus-wide, the affirmative agenda is going to be really important with all of our committees. But I think the accountability piece, which Oversight is especially, going to be leaning into, is very important. And I don't think we should leave corruption unanswered. And so whether it's the direct corruption that's happening in the White House for the family, or whether it's pay-to-play schemes that might be happening at DHS or other agencies, we shouldn't be leaving any of that on the table. And it's important to remind the American public that if you are going to rip off the American taxpayer and you're going to try to enrich your friends or enrich yourself, then you are going to be held accountable for that. And so I do not think that we need to be leaving some of the corruption for another day. I think all of that has got to be taken on, and we're going to be very committed to that in oversight, but also in working with all the other oversight subcommittees that exist across the entire caucus. And so I think we'll have a very robust agenda on anti-corruption across the caucus.
And, Paul, one thing that reminds me of the answers that Robert gave and Joe just gave a moment ago, all of a sudden the Social Security Administration now is hiring people again? And I think taking a good hard look at Doge for what was done. The denial was there all along. Then we find out that thousands of people were let go. So you couldn't get anybody at the IRS or Social Security on the phone to answer your questions. If you visited the office of Social Security, which I did, and the desks were all vacant. So I think we need to take a good look at Doge and what did or didn't happen as we had these 23-year-olds deciding who should remain an employee of the federal government.
Bottom line, I think, as you've heard from both of our ranking members, advancing policies that put money back in the pockets of hardworking American taxpayers and holding those who are corrupting our government accountable are not mutually exclusive. And I think House Democrats have proven a capacity to do both, and we intend to do that.
As talking about corruption and financial integrity and transparency, today the CEO of Kalshi was on Capitol Hill, and among one of the things he says is that bets like how open the Strait of Hormuz will be in any given week are no different than oil futures. Obviously, that's very closely related to military action. There's bets on Kalshi for congressional action, like directly, such as the SAVE Act. What do you make of the availability of these bets for something that has so much to do with this public institution, and what further regulation do you think needs to be happening?
Well, I'll just speak for myself. I think it's outrageous and unconscionable. I saw an announcement or something earlier today that indicated some type of betting markets now on flight delays, all right, that's some new frontier, so to speak, that apparently these folks are now embarking on. I think it's ridiculous. It warrants a regulatory system put in place by the Congress. I think it's untenable in terms of the way in which it's currently progressing. And I suspect that there are other lawmakers that would concur with my view on that front. I would also say, however, there is something that we could do today. The United States Senate, on a bipartisan basis, reached a very simple conclusion that members of Congress and their staffs, and their families, ought not be participating in these prediction markets for obvious reasons. And they passed, by unanimous consent, a resolution precluding them from doing precisely that. They did that with very little fanfare and on a very expedited basis. We haven't done it in the House of Representatives. Why? Because Speaker Johnson refuses to allow a measure in that form to come to the floor. We could do that today, and the American people could then have confidence that their lawmakers and their staffs are not engaging in these prediction markets. Right now, of course, that confidence is lacking precisely because Speaker Johnson refuses to do anything about it, and I suspect it's for the same reason he refuses to put a stock trading ban on the floor, which of course we've fought for.
Your question's self-evident, because if you're saying the Strait of Hormuz and then we're betting on oil futures, those two are linked. I mean, that's an easy one.
Yes.
Two questions, and they're big ones. First, on ICE, we know the president has reversed the very short pause on traffic stops. We are just 4, I think, legislative weeks away from September 30th. ICE is obviously funded through the end of President Trump's term because of reconciliation. But I wonder if, as Democrats, you're thinking about this next funding debate as a time to talk about ICE again. And I know you want to codify code of conduct. If you could speak to that. And then the other, we've just got, CENTCOM has just posted on X that they're launching more military strikes against Iran. This is in keeping with what we've expected this week. So just as this news is breaking, I kind of wonder where you guys think we are with Iran and what concerns you have.
With respect to the latter part of your question, I haven't seen that reporting, so I'll reserve opining on it until I've had a chance to look at it. But with respect to the first part of your question, I think what's happening is unconscionable. We saw, of course, the developments in Maine and the murder of yet another person on the streets of Maine. I think that from my perspective, House Democrats have never stopped talking about the need to impose accountability and to exact reforms in ICE. That conversation has been an ongoing one, notwithstanding, obviously, as you noted, the realities of the way in which Republicans refused to ultimately come to the table and to negotiate in good faith. And so I suspect that Ranking Member DeLauro and the members of the Appropriations Committee will lead a conversation caucus-wide over the coming 60 days in advance of the September 30th deadline, and potentially with respect to a CR that may be on the horizon, about not just this important topic, but many others. But Robert, I don't know if you... No, I agree. Okay. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, back on the Israel amendment. In 2024, 37 House Democrats voted to cut off aid in Israel. It seems clear that more than 37 will vote for this amendment today. What do you think has caused that shift, and what have you observed in the House Democratic Caucus over these past couple of years with respect to Israel?
I would say, I mean, I've spoken about that particular issue in response to Max's very astute questions and observations, and we'll have more to say about that concluding the vote and after the vote, and we'll see where we go from there. Other questions? Caitlin?
You know, I just recently came back from Colorado.
Yes.
I spoke with a lot of voters.
Welcome back.
Your colleagues already mentioned this, but I want to get you on this.
Yeah.
I talked to a lot of voters who, you know, were less concerned about corruption and Trump, although a lot of them cared about that, more concerned about affordability issues.
Mm-hmm.
Are you concerned that Democrats are taking their eyes off the ball when it comes to affordability by focusing on all the different ways, all the corruption stuff that Trump has done?
I don't think so, respectfully, in my view, because, again, I think there's connective tissue there. That is to say, yes, Americans, Coloradans, as you know, are deeply concerned about affordability and the ways in which this administration has made life more expensive for them and their families. And one of the reasons, one of the driving, the impetus for that is the self-enrichment that's happening here in Washington, D.C. on the part of President Trump and his administration. I think that those are connected, and I think we have an obligation, this perhaps goes back to Paul's question, to further and better illuminate that to the American public about precisely why, at the end of the day, they are being wronged when everything is going up, prices are going up, and Donald Trump is attempting to take $1.8 billion of taxpayer dollars to give to people who were convicted of crimes related to January 6th. Those are connected invariably, and we have an obligation, and I think you'll see more demonstration of that connection in the coming months.
I agree.
You sure, Robert? All right. All right. Final question before we go back to the floor? All right. Well, again, thank you all for taking the time. We appreciate it.